when we talk about equations, we always talk about doing opposites of things. And so I thought it would be kind of, okay, it might be bad math humor, but I'm going to try this anyway. To talk a little bit about some opposites that we think about. Sweet and sour. Yes, I think about food in the morning because I seem to be hungry all the time. Up and down, left and right. But when we're in math, especially when we're doing equations, these are going to be our three favorites. Add and subtractor opposites. It lets us undo things. Multiply and divider opposites. It lets us undo things. And one we haven't talked about yet, squaring something like x squared and taking its square root are opposites when we're looking at this. So, when we start to take a peek at opposites, I'm going to try and keep everything in line here. We'll see how this works. Maybe. Solve for the given variable. And I did put some on here that are a little more challenging than the ones that you would end up seeing on a quiz. So just kind of work with me here a bit. So, first one. Yep, we're going to drop the hammer on the very first one. And this is why it's important to kind of keep our examples and things ready to go. Solve for x. You're like, okay, problem. Two of them have x's. So our first job, if that happens, is to say, okay, what do the two things have there in common? X. So we can pull the x out. Now, if this y would have been a number, I could put them together, but it wasn't in this case. So here's the question. What do I have to multiply x by to get each of these back? Well, it's kind of like a puzzle. What's missing? To get from x to 2x, the 2 is missing. To get from x to xy, the y is missing. We basically did the distributive property backwards. So once we do that, now it should be easier because there is a single x there now. And now we're going to undo, when we see parentheses, that's like multiply. So to undo multiply, we're going to divide by that whole set of parentheses. And we're going to start seeing enough of these by the time we see it on the quiz, hopefully. We're going to be like, yep, I've seen that like a load of times here. Get ourselves set. X is alone. We're good. And so as I look through these, sometimes, like we said, if I see the same variable twice, I'm going to have to factor. Other times, that may not be the case. I give you number 2. You're like, okay, solve for y. Ooh, there's y's, but they're on different sides of the equals. Yeah. Exactly. Perfect. We want to get them all together first. So we'll minus the one on this side out, because we've got to do an opposite to move it. And all of a sudden, now my y's are together, and there's only one y term. I don't have to factor. That's cool. So, solve for y. Get y alone. Right now, I'm adding 3x to it. How do you undo that? Minus 3x. And the only thing we're really going to have to concern ourselves with here is reminding ourselves, this has x and this doesn't. I can't combine the -7 and -3. So whether I just write -7 minus 3x, or if you decide you're going to put the x term first, it doesn't matter. As long as they stay separated from each other, we're going to be good. So, again, just something to keep in mind. So now I'm going to bounce around a little bit more on some of the rest of these, because I think some of these, as we keep undoing, we'll be able to do. But the one thing I will keep saying is this. Whatever that variable term is, find it first, and especially if there's only one of them, let's box that in to remind us, okay, my first job is to get that box alone. Whatever's not in the box, it's got to go. So, opposite of minus is to add. So we'll add the 10x squared to both sides. These answers will look weird at times. That's another thing we just got to work on getting over. It's going to happen. So now again, I'm solving for y. So now, if I get y on there by itself, let's see, let's get this over here. What am I doing to y? I don't see any pluses or minuses in here, so I'm not adding or subtracting. I'm multiplying them all together. Opposite of multiply, divide. And for some of you, especially if you're doing a worksheet like this, or let's even say on a quiz, when you get a quiz, maybe even just writing the opposites at the top of your paper, give you that extra visual help that we've talked about before, a lot of you have, to be able to finish this. Now, some people may say, hey, though, you could still reduce that further, and you could, but we're so focused right now on just getting the variables alone, I'm not worried about that. If you notice all three of these terms are divisible by 5 and you want to do that, great. I say good for you, but I want to keep it to our main goal right now, and that's to get these solved for. Okay, I got one more I want to do with you. So number 6. Oh boy. So solve for x. Now here's my first issue here. Normally I'd just box this in, but I see it's in radical jail. So we're going to have to deal with that entire radical here in a minute. But the minus 4 is not under there. That's got to go first. Opposite of minus is to add. And now it's going to come down to our details. Like for instance here, y plus 4 is not 4y. We're not multiplying, we're adding. And now my new issue is the radical's in the way. How do I undo a square root? I square it. So since square and square root are opposites, that gets rid of my radical. It frees my terms underneath. We're going to keep this as squared. We're not going to try and multiply that out, distribute it, any of that stuff. Again, one goal right now, and that's just to get x alone. Now that there's nothing under the radical, now that there's not a radical, excuse me, now I can go after my x term. Again, here's my x term, whatever's not in the box, minus 5. We undo. I'm going to say once again, the ones of this depth will not be on the quiz tomorrow, but I do want to kind of expose you to it. And you're like, well, why aren't you adding the 5 to a 4? They're like terms. This is in parentheses. Parentheses are kind of a block off. It's like, okay, this is our little home. You've got to stay out. So we had to do that. And then finally, to get x alone, we're multiplying it by 2. So we're going to divide. I do get isolating variables is a weird thing. We're used to getting x equals in a number, y equals in a number, and being done. But in cases like this, I've got to trust that I can keep doing opposites to get to the places that I need.